The snow on the mountain was deep and cruel when Sarah Bennett was pushed forward by her brother-in-law. His hand pressed hard into her back as if he was shoving away a problem he no longer wished to carry. Her worn boots sank into the cold snow, and a sharp wind cut through her thin shawl. Up ahead, hidden between tall old pine trees, stood a dark wooden cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney into the evening sky. It looked silent, lonely, and almost frightening. This was her final destination. Sarah stumbled when her weak legs slipped on ice. She fell to the ground but did not cry out. Pain was something she had learned to swallow long ago. Her brother-in-law hissed at her to get up. He did not look at her with care or concern. To him she was a burden, a mouth he did not want to feed. She was the widow of his brother, but he treated her like something useless. She stood again, brushing the snow from her scraped palms. A thin scar marked the back of her hand, a reminder of the cruel life she had known before. She kept her head down as a shadow stepped out onto the porch of the cabin. It was him, the mountain man. Some called him a recluse, some called him a ghost. In town, parents told their children stories of him. They said he once had a family, but a fire and sickness took everything from him 16 years ago. Since then, he lived alone on the mountain, silent as stone. He was tall and broad, with a thick beard mixed with black and gray. His steps were slow but strong. His eyes were dark and calm, like deep water. He looked at Sarah's brother-in-law first, then at her. His eyes did not show pity or disgust. They showed nothing. He only nodded once. Her brother-in-law puffed his chest and stepped back. "Debt's paid," he said, and turned to leave. He didn't say goodbye. He did not look at Sarah again. His footsteps faded into the snow, leaving her and the mountain man alone. The man did not speak. He did not offer a hand or a welcome. He looked at Sarah for a moment longer, then turned and went inside, leaving the door slightly open. She didn't know if it was a sign to enter or a test. With a heavy breath, she stepped into the cabin. The inside was small, quiet, and cold. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, giving the room a warm glow. There was a rough wooden table, one chair, a narrow bed against the wall, and a pile of furs on the floor. It was clear the furs were where she was meant to sleep. She sat on them, pulling her shawl around her body and trying to make herself small. She had trained herself to hide, to avoid drawing attention. The mountain man moved around the cabin with steady hands and silent steps. He stoked the fire, sharpened a knife, and hung animal traps near the wall. He did not once look at her. It felt like she had entered a life where words no longer existed. Night came quickly. Snow beat against the window, and cold air slipped into the gaps in the cabin walls. Even sitting near the fire, Sarah began to shiver. Her thin shawl did nothing to keep her warm. She tried to hide her shaking, but her body trembled too much to control. He stood from his bed, walked toward her, and she flinched. She curled in fear, expecting a strike. But instead of a raised hand, he placed a heavy fur pelt over her shoulders. It was warm and soft, smelling of pine and winter. He stood there for a moment, then walked back to his own cot and lay down. Sarah pulled the fur close and felt her shaking ease. It was a small act, quiet and simple. But to her, it felt like the first moment of safety she had known in years. Days passed. The routine stayed the same. He woke before sunrise, left to hunt, returned with game, chopped wood, and ate his meals standing by the fire. Every evening he left a warm bowl of stew for her. He didn't sit with her, he didn't speak, but she was fed, warmed, and safe. One evening, Sarah tried to help by adding wood to the fire. She slipped and burned her hand on the iron edge. She gasped in pain. The cabin door opened as he returned. His eyes went straight to her and the injury. He walked over and she pulled back, frightened. He paused, then gently took her wrist and turned her palm upward. He picked up a small tin from a shelf, opened it, and the smell of herbs filled the air. He rubbed a cool salve over the burn. Relief spread across her skin. His thumb brushed her wrist once in a calm, grounding touch. She looked up at him, confused. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why are you being kind to me?" For a long moment he said nothing. The firelight moved across his face. Then he spoke for the first time since she had arrived. His voice was deep and rough from years of silence. "You were cold." He walked away, but those 3 words wrapped around her heart. He didn't say them to comfort her, he said them because they were true. It was simple. Direct. Real. For the first time, she felt like a person, not a burden. Something in the quiet began to change. The cabin slowly began to feel less like a cold shelter, and more like a place where Sarah could breathe again. The quiet between them was no longer heavy with fear. It became a strange kind of comfort. She learned his ways by watching him. He carved small wooden figures in the evenings. His hands were strong, yet gentle as they shaped animals from blocks of wood. Wolves, hawks, bears. Each figure looked alive by the time he finished. One morning, Sarah woke to find something waiting beside her bowl of porridge. It was a tiny carved bird with its wings slightly lifted, as if ready to fly. She picked it up carefully. It was smooth, detailed, and full of life. No one had ever given her anything this thoughtful before. It was not a payment. It was not something she had earned. It was simply a gift. Holding it warmed something deep inside her. Nights were still difficult. Memories haunted her dreams. One night, Sarah woke crying after a nightmare of her past. In her dream, her husband's anger returned, and she had felt the same helpless fear. She sat up, shaking, trying to calm her breath. The firelight flickered, casting shadows across the room. She noticed the mountain man was not asleep. He sat in the chair near the fire, watching her, not with pity but understanding. Without a word, he slowly lifted his sleeve. There, on his arm, was a scar shaped like a small handprint. The mark was old and burned into his skin. She looked at him and understood. He did not need to speak. He carried his own pain, his own story of loss. For the first time, Sarah did not feel alone in her hurt. The silence between them became a bond. Over time, she began to take small steps to rebuild herself. She cleaned the cabin, patched his torn shirts, and organized the shelves. She cooked simple meals and swept the floor. These tiny tasks made her feel like she belonged, not as a debt, but as someone trying to make a home. She started humming soft tunes from her childhood while she worked. It felt strange at first, like she was waking up a part of herself she thought was gone. One afternoon, she washed her hair and gently brushed out the knots. She braided it neatly and placed a small white feather she found in the woodpile into her braid. When the mountain man came back from checking traps, he paused in the doorway. His eyes rested on her hair. He gave a slow, small nod. It was not a compliment, but it meant more than words. He saw her. Just as life began to settle, trouble found them. A fur trader traveling through the mountains stopped at the cabin to warm himself. He talked too much and smelled of tobacco and lies. He spoke to the mountain man as if Sarah was invisible. He said her brother-in-law had been talking in town, telling people the mountain man had stolen her and was keeping her against her will. He claimed there was gold hidden in the cabin. Now, the sheriff and a group were gathering to come for her. When the trader left, the cabin felt colder than winter wind. Sarah watched the mountain man silently pull a rifle from a hidden place beneath the floor. His face changed. He was no longer just a quiet man keeping to himself. He was preparing to protect what was his. He showed her a hiding spot behind the cabin, a narrow opening in the rocks. His voice was low and serious when he told her to hide there if anyone came. But Sarah had spent her life running and hiding. She was tired of it. She did not want to be helpless again. So she acted. Remembering her brother-in-law's fear of wolves, she laid a trail of broth and scraps of meat through the trees, leading away from the cabin and toward the place she had seen wolves gather. It was a small hope, but she wanted to do something. She wanted to help, not hide. At sunrise, they arrived. 5 men on horseback rode through the snow to the cabin. The sheriff shouted for the mountain man to come out. Her brother-in-law stood proudly beside him, angry and greedy. They said they came for property, not people. Sarah stepped outside before anyone could break down the door. The mountain man stood behind her like a shield. She faced the men, her voice steady. She pulled down part of her dress to show the scars on her shoulder. "This is the debt you paid," she said. The sheriff and the men stared, shocked by the truth written on her skin. The wolves appeared among the trees, watching with glowing eyes. The men grew nervous. The mountain man placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder, not to claim her, but to stand with her. His voice was clear and strong. "She is not property. She is home." Quote. His words echoed through the cold air. One by one, the men lowered their weapons. The truth broke their anger. They left, dragging her brother-in-law with them. The wolves stayed until the last horse disappeared down the mountain. Then they faded back into the woods. That night, the cabin felt warm in a new way. The danger had passed, but something else was changing. Sarah looked at his bed, then at the fur pile where she slept. After everything, one question rose in her heart, quiet but brave. She looked at him sitting by the fire. "Is your bed still empty?" "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far?" Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The question hung in the warm light of the fire. Sarah's voice had been soft, but it filled the cabin like a spark in dry grass. The mountain man stopped cleaning his rifle. His hands stilled. For 16 years, no one had dared step inside the walls he had built around his heart. Now this woman, who came to him as a debt, was asking if there was space beside him. He slowly lifted his eyes to hers. He did not rush. Silence had been his language for so long that words came only when they truly mattered. The fire crackled, filling the stillness. His gaze held hers for a long moment, steady and searching, as if he needed to be sure this was real. Then, without a word, he stood. Sarah's breath caught. He walked to a wooden chest in the corner, a chest she had never seen him open. He knelt, lifted the lid, and paused. When he returned, he carried a small silver ring, dull with age but still beautiful. He knelt in front of her, so their eyes met at the same level. He opened his hand, revealing the ring. His voice was low but sure. It was hers. Sarah knew who he meant, his late wife, the woman he had loved and lost in the fire that took his old life. He wasn't offering a replacement. He was offering a piece of his heart he had buried with his past. It was not a proposal made with practiced words or big promises. It was the bravest thing a broken man could do. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the ring. When she slid it onto her finger, it fit gently, as if it had been waiting to return to a hand that would honor it. A soft breath escaped her lips, not of sadness, but of beginning. He didn't move to take her in his arms. He didn't need to. The air between them changed. They understood. That night, the fur bed beside the fire remained untouched. She slept beside him, their hands lightly touching, not holding yet, but enough to say, "We are no longer alone." Spring came slowly to the mountains. Snow melted and the earth softened. The cabin began to change too. The mountain man cut timber, adding a second room to the cabin. The sound of his axe was no longer a lonely echo, but a building song. Sarah planted a small garden outside, her fingers digging into dark soil. Side by side, they worked without needing many words. Their silence was full, warm, and shared. They ate together at the table. He began to sit in the chair across from her instead of standing by the fire. He watched her braid her hair in the mornings. Sometimes she caught him looking, not with hunger, but with quiet admiration, as if he was grateful she existed in his world. One evening, as the sun set behind the peaks, they sat together on the new porch he had built. Wolves lingered at the tree line, not threatening, just watching. They had become silent guardians of their home. Sarah held the tiny carved bird he had given her. She looked at him, then at the land around them. "Do you ever wish to speak of them?" she asked gently. He looked toward the mountains. His voice was rough but steady. "Some memories stay quiet, but they don't hurt the same now." She slid her hand into his. His hand closed around hers, strong and warm. It was not a grand declaration. It was better. It was peace. Seasons turned. Summer brought sunlight through the trees. Fall painted the forest gold. Their bond grew not through sudden passion, but through little moments of trust. His hand at her back as they walked through the woods, her sewing a patch on his coat with a small heart stitched inside where only he would feel it. His carved figures placed on the shelf she made for them. A home built from pieces of two broken lives, gently put back together. One winter night, as snow fell softly outside, Sarah woke to a soft whisper of fur against skin. The mountain man was awake, watching her with tired but peaceful eyes. For the first time, he reached for her without hesitation. She shifted closer, and he wrapped his arms around her. They held each other in a long, quiet embrace that said everything words could never express. "You're not cold anymore," he said softly. "Not since you," she whispered back. Years later, people would tell stories of the mountain man and the curvy woman who tamed his silence, though they would never fully know the truth. They would speak of the wolves that guarded them, the garden that bloomed where snow once ruled, and the cabin where a broken man found a reason to live again. But for Sarah and the man she now called hers, the truth was simple. She came to the mountain as a debt. She stayed as his peace. And together they built a home not made of wood and stone, but of healing, trust, and a love that whispered instead of shouted.